We're going to go over how to assign materials to an object and what the different types of materials are that we will be using. So here I have my model, and if we check the attribute editor, we can see that there is only the default Lambert 1 assigned to it, and generally you don't want to change Lambert 1. You can very easily make new materials, and depending on what you're doing, you'll need to make a different type of material. If you're making a color ID, you'll want to assign different colored Lamberts. And to do so, you select the object, right-click and hold, and come down to assign favorite material, and you will have Lambert near the top. It will come in looking the exact same, however in the attribute editor it will have a new name, now called Lambert 2. You can rename it in the attribute editor, and it's going to call it red. Change the color to red. And you now have a beginning for a material ID. There'll be another tutorial that goes over exactly how to use a material ID, but that's how you assign a Lambert. When you are applying your materials, and for any final rendering for your object, you don't want to use a Lambert. You'll want to use what's called an aiStandardSurface, which is an Arnold material. Select all the objects that you want to have the material, right-click and hold, and come down to assign new material. You will have a list of all of your materials, and what you want to do is click on this Arnold tab on the left. You'll have AI in front of everything, and that means that it is an Arnold ready material, and click on aiStandardSurface. If you right-click on it, you can add it to your favorites. And what that allows you to do is, instead of going through this entire menu, you come down to assign favorite material, and you'll have aiStandardSurface. It will be a slightly darker gray, and the aiStandardSurface does have some reflections and highlights by default. You have some preset materials that you can use. So let's select the screen and put another aiStandardSurface on it. And you have some ability to change the color. Your metalness slider will make it look metal or not metal. And your roughness will go from rough to smooth. You won't see a change always in the viewport, but when you render there will be a change. To use a preset material, all you have to do is click on the little presets tab, and you have a list of all the different preset materials that Arnold ships with. So right now I have one material on everything and a second material on the screen. I'm going to select the screen and just apply that other material. So I come down to assign existing material, and it is aiStandardSurface 1. You have to be careful that not to select the standard surface. There is a difference. I'm going to rename this material Microscope Matte for microscope material. And now we have an aiStandardSurface for this entire object. You can always view your materials in the Hypershade, which is this little sphere button right here. You can also find it in Windows, Rendering Editors, and Hypershade. And you can see it has the same icon next to it. If you open it up, it will give you a list of all the materials in your scene. And we can see we have Lambert 1, microscope material, the red Lambert, and the standard surface one that is there by default. If you click on any of them, it will give you all the properties in the Hypershade here that is the same as the attribute editor. If you right click and hold and go down to Graph Network, it will show you a visual representation of all your inputs to the material. Right now we don't have any. And one very useful feature is if you come up to Edit and delete unused nodes. Right now we're just using the microscope material, so a lot of these will disappear. The red disappeared and the extra aiStandardSurface. And now let's go over how to actually assign textures to a material. Textures will be exported from Substance Painter, and we will be using base color, metalness, normal, and roughness. There are other ones that you can get as well, like emissive and height, but we won't be using them as much. And this is what a base color is: emissive, metal, normal, and roughness. And we're going to be applying all of them except for emissive right now. Select any object that has the correct material on it, and we'll have all these inputs. Whenever you see a name with a checkerboard, that means it can take a texture input. And we want to start with base color, which is the same name as our texture export, base color. Click on the checkerboard, and you will get a pop-up. And we're going to be using the file because we want to search for an outside file. Then where it says image name, click on the folder icon. When you click on the folder, it will bring up a new menu, and it should default to the source images of whichever project you are currently working in. You can have subfolders in that source images folder for more organization if you want. I have an Arnold folder and my microscope folder. Then click on the base color and hit open. It might look very, very dark, and you might not see anything at all. If you still see flat gray, just hit 6 on your keyboard to turn on textures. I'm going to select any of those objects again and come over to base and metalness, and we also have a metalness texture. So click on the checkerboard, search for a file, open, and this one you have to make some changes. The color space is by default sRGB, and this is not a color texture. So click on it and come down to Utility and Raw. And then next you have to come down to this Color Balance tab and turn on Alpha is Luminance. We'll be doing that for one more as well. So I'm going to select the object with the material again, and now come down to Specular and Roughness, and load in another file. And again, it needs to be color space, utility, and raw, as well as alpha is luminance. Finally, we have our normal map, which adds some fake detail to it. And there is nowhere that actually says normal, but if you come down to geometry, we have a bump map, and a bump map is an old version of a normal map, and it's going to load it in on that checkerboard and choose File. This menu does look a little bit different. In this first tab, you need to tell it to use as a tangent space normal, not as a bump map. And then click on the second tab and search for your file. This one also needs to be a raw color space, and you actually need to turn off alpha is luminance for that one. So that is how you load up a texture onto materials and create new materials, and next we'll go over some basic lighting.